Okay, I've got 11 o'clock. We're going to get started because every person on this stage would be worthy of their own individual session. We're very fortunate to have them all here together today. My name's Ray Cross. I'm with AFCEA International. On behalf of AFCEA and INSA, thank you all for joining us for this conversation, Redefining National Security. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. First, there are question cards throughout the room. That's how we'll be doing the Q&A. If you were here yesterday, you saw this done several times. But write your question down, write it legibly. Those will get asked first, without a doubt. Then once you write it, just raise your hand, and we've got interns and support staff that'll come around and grab those, and we'll feed them up to the moderator. After this session, please join us in the Potomac foyer. If it had a chandelier, we call it a foyer, but it's the foyer today. And that's where we're going to have lunch. And our breakout sessions this afternoon will begin at 1 p.m. So let's get started. I'd like to just introduce the moderator, Ms. Karen Warack. Karen is a member of the AFCEA Intel Committee. She has senior and executive leadership experience at CIA, NRO, and finally culminating as the Assistant D&I for Requirements, Cost Estimating, and Strategic Studies. So please join me in a warm round of applause for Karen and this wonderful panel.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Want to make sure? Okay, great. If I fade out, somebody just, raise your hand. What I'd like to do by starting is provide you some context to this discussion, and then I'll go about introducing our esteemed panel here, and old friends and colleagues. So Louis Shepard and I started talking a few months ago about what we really wanted to try to drive in a conversation about the broader conversation about national security writ large. And after some back and forth and a lot of thinking, we settled on essentially the following, which I'll provide as context. Our national security apparatus evolved over multiple decades when the U.S.'s position of power was different than it is now. This has been brought up several times in the course of events in our sessions yesterday and already this morning. We have long operated from the safety provided by our unique geography and with the confidence of primacy. However, the world has changed, as we're all well aware, and the pace of change just continues to accelerate. Borders no longer equate to safety in the way that they did in the past. And access to and novel application of technology, data, and analytic tools from around the world is near ubiquitous. As a community, we discuss the need to evolve. I can't tell you how many times over the decades of service that I have been in conversations, whether it's related to technology, acquisition, how we bring on people, how we interface with industry. And I had been an industry executive before I went to CIA, so I understood both sides. How many times we've been in conversations about the need to evolve. But in many cases, we've barely begun to acknowledge the extent to which we need to change, in particular, if we really want to stay at the forefront. With me today, I have Scott Bumgarner, immediately to my left, who is currently serving as a senior CIA acquisition executive. In the middle, Peter Highnam, who's been performing the duties as Secretary of War for Critical Technologies. And at the end, a very familiar face to many, Gilman Louie, who's managing partner of America's Frontier Fund and founding partner of Alsop Louie, and also known for being the CEO at the beginning of In-Q-Tel. We recruited these three folks specifically because of the range of the experience that each has independently and that they bring in combination. There's experience among these three gentlemen in commercial and national security industries and a broad array of those. private equity and venture, in IC and DoD interaction and service, engineering, management, hard sciences, acquisition, they cover the range. And pretty close to everything that we would need to have in order to do justice to this conversation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have each of them give us their, we'll call it their elevator speech, their quick bio, especially as it pertains and provides you some additional background in their relevance to this particular conversation today. And Scott, I'll start with you.
So thanks, Karen. Thanks for the invitation, everyone. Good morning. So I'm back at CIA for the last year working on a significant program, but prior to that, for 3 years, I was the Senior Procurement Executive for the IC, which is a position where I was on loan to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. So I got to deal with all 18 IC elements and see how they're similar in some ways, how they're different in other ways. And before that, I was the Deputy Chief Strategy Officer at CIA for 3 years and have done a lot of assignments before that. If you go back far enough, I even owned a restaurant in South Carolina.
I remember that.
So I have a little bit of a different take than a lot of people. And I said, in order to get approval to do this talk today, I had to do it under one constraint, and that is that I have to give I have to let you know that any remarks that I'm giving are purely my own. I'm not representing the US government, the intelligence community, or the CIA. So if there's any press here, I said this, so I don't have to spend the next 3 weeks trying to explain what I was thinking when I said something. So.
I appreciate that. Peter.
About 12 years or so in oil and gas exploration. 4 years at DARPA doing electronic warfare. It's a natural fit. 6 years in public health, 12 years in the IC, including as director of IARPA. The tour NGA, running research, back to DARPA as deputy for about 5 years, and been at where I am now in R&E, research and engineering in the Department of War for about 3 years. Generalist by background, and I expect to learn an awful lot from these two gentlemen as we go through today. I'm just an R&D guy.
Just an R&D guy.
Just an R&D guy.
Just an R&D guy.
True.
Gilman.
It's hard to imagine it's been 25 years, actually more, 26 years since we started in QTEL.
Right? It's been over 20 years since we met.
Exactly right. And the mission for me hasn't changed, which is bring transformation to national security. I think all of us have had that in our careers, and that theme continues all the way through. Rather than going through my bio, I would say that today, America's Frontier Fund is my new focus. AFF is the first fund funded by the Department of War Office of Strategic Capital to partner with private capital to bring in capabilities, not just to the department, but across the US as critical foundational technologies. I think this is particularly important in this moment in time. I see it from both the national security side, but also in my other day job, right, running a venture fund. We see all of the technologies transforming from enterprise to commercial, even down to things that you may think is rather unusual. Like I'm on the board of a company called Niantic. Niantic basically publishes this little game called Pokemon Go. You might say, well, what's Pokemon Go have to do with national security? I would say that Pokemon Go, it's technology-based, allows 50 million people simultaneously in real time, geospatially accurate, right, with complete capabilities of rendering actual real-world spaces in fractions of seconds. And if we had that kind of capability in the intel community, in the defense, it would be transformative. So bringing what's going on in the commercial space together with our needs in national security, that's kind of what I'm continuing to do.
It keeps you off the streets at night?
I get some good Pokemon.
All right, thank you. So Scott, I'm going to start with you, but we'll change the order. I won't always stick you with the first question. Yeah, all right. And just to be clear, as we go along, because you know you're all going to get the same question, you have to add on to what the other person says. Don't just go, well, I agree with what they said, right? So I don't want a lot of overlap is what I'm getting at. We talked about this, so they know. If you could pick up and focus on 2 areas to implement fundamental changes in the US, and I'll just call it the national security apparatus, so that's everything that's involved. Budget, technology, acquisition, people, mission authorities, et cetera. What would you focus on in those 2 things?
Well, perhaps not surprisingly, I'll focus on acquisition since it's the one I'm most familiar with. One of the things that came up over and over and over again when I was in OD&I representing the whole IC was, do you have the right authorities, the right acquisition authorities? And we've looked at this from so many different perspectives. And this might be surprising to some, maybe not to others, but I really truly believe we do. But what we don't have is the wherewithal to actually use them when they are optimally suited for some of the tasks at hand. So the question then becomes, why is there such a reluctance to use these very authorities that were designed to make things easier, to potentially bring in new participants that are reluctant to deal with the IC? And it's really troubling because it really reflects so many lost opportunities that I've seen so many times, and I'm still seeing them today, by the way. So when I looked deeper into this, I think part of this, and I'm a true believer in the power of incentives. The right incentives can encourage desirable behavior, and the wrong incentives obviously can discourage it. So one of the things that I've seen so many times again is we make things more burdensome to use the innovation. The more innovative authorities is, in order to do it, instead of making it easier and a greater propensity to want to use it, you actually have to go through more arduous approval chains. That alone doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it or do it, but it is an impediment. And if you want to use incentives properly, I think you actually should make it more arduous to not use the innovation when it makes sense.
So your point being that it's harder to do something different.
You're already, right off the start, you're making it something above and beyond what you otherwise would have to do for a more conventional acquisition approach. You have to do something. And that dissuades the use by itself. The other thing, and this is surprising to some as a guy that worked for CIA, to say that we're risk averse is surprising when you see the Hollywood movies and things, but we really are. And culturally, when you look at particularly the acquisition workforce, but not exclusively, in fact, not only is there few incentives to want to encourage innovation or do something different, it's just the opposite. We all too often, this is above and beyond the burdensome approval chain. We make it, from a career perspective, something unenviable. It's like you take a personal risk by doing something that might not work. But we know that in order to get the true fruits of some of the most innovative practices, they don't necessarily work the first time. But you learn some powerful insights by doing that. We forgo that when we make it so institutional. And we have well-intentioned individuals, and I'm not here to critique them, but they pass on that culture, and I see it all the time, and it's really sad. The other part that I think about that's a huge impediment is, in order to do something new, when you're already stretched for time and resources, it takes some investment of time to actually learn how to do it properly and learn the pros and cons of different courses of action. And there's not surprisingly a reticence to do that. So one of the things that I think is most exciting is something that DHS has done through their Procurement Innovation Lab, which is called the PIL, is they have an internal group of acquisition consultants that get forward deployed just temporarily when they're trying to do something new through the varied customers that DHS has. And one of the things that it has that's very different than like bringing in an outside consultant is the antibodies that inevitably sometimes come into play when you bring in someone that's not intrinsically involved in that organization. It doesn't occur with them because these are your colleagues that are being brought in, and they're just brought in just enough to get it jump-started, and hopefully the learning curve gets more efficient next time you do it, because they're really good at that. And I think obviously it takes some resources to invest to do that, but it's very forward-leaning, and I think it can be used in a whole variety of environments. So there are some encouraging avenues like that. So it's not all pessimistic things.
So risk aversion.
Risk aversion, misplaced incentives.
Misplaced incentives.
In my opinion, are the two really cultural things that I see over and over again.
Okay, great, thank you. Peter.
Okay, back to just an R&D guy. So there'll be no overlap. There'll be no overlap.
No overlap. Okay, good.
So for me, in the context in which I serve now and served before, the argument is making sure the fight is never fair, increasing lethality, and deter via strength. How do we get there? That becomes focus, fast, rigorous, always aim high in the R&D, protect what you're doing, protect how the investments are being made, and always aim for scale deployment. There are no S&T projects in what we do. And I always view I had the easy job, not as hard as Scott's, but I get to do the fun bit, the technology, the science. The hard bit is having you, someone on the other end of this, picking up these new tools and toys and capabilities we give you and changing how you do business. That's the hard bit. And I have the easy job and the most fun job. So you asked for 2?
2?
I've got 4. Can I overachieve or just do 2 and then wait?
Pick your top 2.
Okay. 1, address all 3 valleys of death in the process. That's lab to prototype. There isn't one. People say 1, and that's a catch-all and whatever. And that means you end up devising techniques and tools that don't do the job, because that's not the problem. First, going from something that's in the lab, you made it work, you've got that benchtop thing, you have a whole optical bench full of lights and mirrors and such. But it's not something you can put into a little tiny box and stick into a missile. So lab to prototype, part 1. Prototype to product, part 2. And then product to product development or production and deployment. Oh, and by the way, if you're a company, there is no revenue until you get to that last part. So you are relying on us as a customer, which is defense, war, as a customer, to help out here. So the department has a lot of mechanisms to address these valleys separately, and we're moving towards more strategic integration. One of these tools, so going from the left to the right, lower, going across the valleys, think of the SBIR programs, the basic research programs. When we give out grants, we're not doing generally blue sky research. We're doing it because there's a military application that we see, and we don't have the science under control yet. So that's at the low end going up to those first products. We have places like DIU out there engaging with small businesses. We have DARPA, again, which I know from a lot of experience, which can range across these things. These are non-dilutive investments for those of you who are not in this business. We're going to be there, we're going to be demanding, we're going to push you, cajole you, prompt you, everything we can to help make you succeed if there's a viable path on that route. We have, in the context I'm in at the moment, we have ABFIT, which is accelerating towards technologies towards deployment. This takes things that are very useful and valuable, invests in them, and gets them over another of those valleys. We have SCO, the Strategic Capabilities Office in the department. I'm sure some are familiar with them. They operate at higher TRL, higher maturity technologies, adapting, changing, making it do new things, taking it into practice. And then the newest one, which Gilman mentioned before, is the Office of Strategic Capital, which is, thanks to reconciliation, a pretty interesting new way of doing business in which the department is able to back investment opportunities, investment companies to do things. Along this way, that's moving from research and engineering also across to acquisition sustainment. So we map these things, we watch these things, and a lot of tools in place to help out. That's 1.
That's 1? Okay. You have 2?
I have 4. For one more.
No, just one more.
All right. So a lot of researchers and businesses have a good idea for a product. Okay, great. Does it help? Well, how do you assess that? How do we assess that? How do we ask you, we're in the whole business of requirements and acquisition reform. And so we need something that's mission-based, all-domain, joint force, industry-informed, and industry-informing modeling and simulation. That's the push here. That's modeling and sim at all levels of classification. That's live, virtual, and constructive when available and possible. Scenario-based. The Secretary put out a memo on 20th of August this year, which included something called the Mission Engineering and Integration Activity in Research and Engineering. It's a logical successor to things that were already there, but also something that came out of DARPA, which was Assault Breaker 2. This is where you look at the scenario, what's the problem, and bring it through. As a DARPA guy, not at the moment, but been there a few times now, I like this a lot because it feeds directly, gives me the argument for the Hohlmeier questions. And the Hohlmeier question 4, for those who don't know the sequence here, is if you succeed, who cares and why? And that gives you the metrics, the levels of performance that you have to aim for. So.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I did read about that on back in August as part of the whole JCID's announcement.
Right, it's in the reform.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
Gilman, what 2 things would you change in order for us to be at the forefront?
Well, let me start with the 2 things that are critical to change. And it encompasses everything that we do, how we wake up in the morning, how we approach our problems, how we assess the threats at all aspects of national power, right? Not just at the Department of War, but at commerce, in the commercial world, how we think about trade, how we think about our allies, and how we think about our partners. And that's speed and scale, because we don't have it, right? We are fundamentally in a mind lock set that we don't need to operate in speed, so we operate in safety. Safety as in, what's the safe thing to do so that I don't lose my job and keep my head below so that nobody knows I exist, right? And if you have that attitude, we're not gonna win the fight. The second part is scale. We have lost our ability to scale. I'm talking from everything from software to manufacturing and capabilities. So if you take those 2 words and apply it to all aspects of national power, you begin to understand what we need to do. The second part of that equation is we have limited time. I see the plans in the IC and the Department of War that talks about capabilities coming online in 2035 to 2040. It's going to be all over by then. The race is between 2027 and 2035. Remember that scene in Apollo 13 where, okay, we have the astronauts need to get from here at the moon back to the Earth, right? And they're going to run out of oxygen right here. How do we get them back, right? They didn't have the time to go back and do a 4-year study to figure it out. Well, we are in that same mindset. If our goal is to make our adversaries wake up every morning and ask themselves the question, not today, then we have to not just project, we have to produce. So let's talk about speed. Speed now is a mindset that the primacy driver in acquisitions and capabilities is date certain. I got to have the best capability by this date. Not what can I do for the cheapest regardless of date, or what capabilities that can change the world way past that date. So we have to organize around time-based competition, because I will tell you, our competitors across the Pacific is driven by time-based competition. Then scale. We do not have the manufacturing infrastructure to actually take advantage of all the innovation that we have, which is our capabilities and our advantage in the marketplace and our advantage to fight, and actually get it implemented at the levels where it actually is relevant. So we had to rethink whether we're building a weapon system, this old model that every company has to have their own way to get to production. We didn't win World War II that way. And if you look at what's going on in Asia right now, with ODMs and consumer electronics and the relationship between the design skills that we have in the US and their manufacturing base, is they have separated the two. The manufacturing base manufactures anything that comes out of the innovation engine. We don't have that. So as you think through those two questions, speed and scale, we have the capabilities to do it, but we just have to want to do it. We did it in World War II, we did it in the 60s, we did it in electronics, but then we gave it all up. We outsourced it. And now with the president bringing everything back, we can't bring it back the old way. And for those who say, well, we're in Intel, we don't actually make anything, right? Wrong. You make the knowledge that's actionable that wins the fight. And if we don't have the fabric to compete on information from collect to dissemination and actually deliver it into the systems that are going to have to fight, we're going to lose. So speed and scale.
Speed and scale. Okay. So you've brought up a couple of things as part of coming up with speed and scale. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with you on this next question. And that is, so you've talked about the problem. What are the barriers that are basically driving that problem? And what would you change in order to get rid of those barriers? Gilman.
Okay, a few things. I'll start on the information side, and I'll move into manufacturing of physical systems. And we know they all have to be integrated, right? All you have to do is go to San Francisco, hop into a Waymo, and you realize what the future is going to look like. So, first, information systems. I know we did this big effort on the cloud. That was like the first half step, right? And I got to hand it to the IC. IC actually did a remarkably good job in the migration to the cloud, right? Reasonably on time, leveraging existing technology. If we're going to go off and win this capabilities, it's going to be driven by our ability to take that information using the most advanced tools, things like large language models, AI, and a dozen other capabilities, and integrate it in a way where we have speed. So, as was just discussed from earlier, part of that is we need to have the digital twins of the world. Without digital twinning, we can't run the AI models to actually give us a projected effect where we can take advantage of compute. Which means that IC has to have a fabric where all that information that we collect in all of our ints and store in all of our compartments and be able to take advantage of that while maintaining security, but giving our information systems superior capabilities, because it's not just about humans. I'll give you a great example, right? Which is, we love maps. We love satellite imagery. All of our information is oriented towards humans, right? How many pixels can you see with your naked eyeball from the satellite for an analyst using stereo pairs to figure out what's there? We don't do that in the electronics world. We never translate it to human understanding. It's machine to machine. Humans are the slow part in the loop. So we had to rethink how we collect that information, how we process that information, and how we apply it. So if we got machine to machine with human oversight, then when it comes up with the variety of capabilities on the decision loop, how do we get it into the machines? So that means that we have to integrate our information systems with our warfighting systems. It's no longer the IC and the Department of War. We have to have full integration because that's what the other guy is doing. And finally, our systems have to be, look, how many people here have kids who grew up on Lego Mindstorm? Okay, that's part of our problem. Right, Lego Mindstorm is basically any kid can build a robot, and any kid can program a robot, and there's all sorts of competitions out there, right? Our weapon systems need to look a lot more like Lego Mindstorm than bespoke systems that integrators have total control of that platform, and every platform is unique, and every platform's information system underneath is proprietary. That is not going to win the fight. And finally, on the manufacturing side, as I said, if we're going in a world of attritables, now I'm not suggesting that everything is going to be drones and swarms, right? We're not going to give up our high-end capabilities in the Department of War. That'd be foolish. But if we're going to do the other side of that equation, then we have to have the ability to manufacture at speed, which means next generation manufacturing capabilities, take advantage of blue manufacturing that the department wants to drive forward on, take advantage of what the commercial world has, learn from some of our partners on how to manufacture at scale. We should be pumping out dozens of hypersonic capabilities a day, not a year. And we can do it, but we have to think differently about how it gets done.
Okay. Scott, same question to you. How would you go about, like, what are the barriers to addressing the problems you raised, and what do you think specifically needs to change?
Specifically to the issue that Gilman raised?
Well, you can add on to that, but also what you raised.
So let me touch that one first. So one of the persistent challenges I keep seeing is the emerging technologies that are increasingly so vital to our very missions have a shorter lifespan than the combined budget and acquisition cycles. So we try to force those technologies to meet our internal constraints instead of the other way around. So it has to stop. And we have to have enough flexibility and nimbleness to mirror what the nature of the industry is. These are, at best, dual-use technologies that we are not properly adept to leveraging. And as long as we have that, we have continued lost opportunities that will increasingly, this wasn't the case 30 years ago, but it is now. And we have to change fundamentally to recognize that. One of the things that I didn't talk about last time in the first question that I think is something that I see as relevant to a lot of the discussions, including the valley of death discussion that Peter raised, was something that really has vexed me for some time, and this is one of those things I'm speaking off the record, in case there's press here.
Disclaimer, we need a sign that says disclaimer, disclaimer.
We'll have you all sign a non-disclosure agreement. So, market research seems like an arcane topic that only acquisition professionals might be interested in. Right now, sadly, many view that as a chore. It's a box to check. It's like, we've done the market research, good, we're done. How thorough and meaningful that research is widely varying. You could certainly point to pockets where we're doing an excellent job at it, getting insightful information. But this gets to the heart of the way we do problem solving, because the thoroughness of that market research defines the whole spectrum of the art of the possible. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't look at it that way. They don't look at what this does to empower changing the way we look at problem solving, doing it as a performance-based acquisition, for instance, instead of 300 pages of overly prescriptive statement of work because we have a monopoly on the only way to do this work. That changes who's going to be interested in doing the work to begin with. The ability to do the same kind of detailed, not just market research for the marketplace, but also company-specific research. We should be doing something that approximates what a VC company does before they make an investment. And I don't think many people, at least from what I've seen, many of the acquisition professionals don't look at it that way. The way we understand what matters to our counterparts, a startup company is often more interested in cash flow than they are in fee percentages. We look at monolithically, all companies typically are motivated the same way when I know that they're not. And the way that we structure things, not taking advantage of a company who's painfully concerned, who has dual-use technologies, does not want to have a government cost accounting system, which would change, not only be incredibly costly, but change the whole culture of how they operate. That's the kind of question we should be looking at. We should be looking at intellectual property and how we can structure things in a way that's compatible with the needs of a commercially oriented company. I would love to see a total transformation on the way that we do market and company-specific research, because as arcane as it sounds on the surface, it changes the whole outcomes of the art of the possible.
So in many cases, that's going to require some change in not really authorities and not really policy at the highest level, but policy within any particular agency or department as to how they're implementing that kind of practice, right?
And I would like to showcase success stories of how empowering it is when you do it the right way and how that reverberates to all the objectives that we have in the government. And it's going to take a persistent, coordinated approach to that, but I think it can be done. It's again, I keep using the term lost opportunity, but that's the way I look at it. It does take an investment of time to do it the right way. But I think it's exciting because to me, that's why I got into this field, is to make a difference. And I don't know how you can do it without treating that with the proper care that it deserves.
Right.
I just don't see it happening enough right now.
Yeah. And it's particularly challenging, again, when we deal with the classified environment. I think, Gilman, when you were working through, especially as InQtel was getting started and how we navigate between the classified intelligence community and intersecting with a venture world and a startup world that, folks don't even generally know how to spell clearance. And, you want to know what about me before you're willing to talk to me. And how do you bridge that gap? So Peter, you mentioned a very kind of complex world related to what's been going on in the R&D area. As far as what are the barriers to success in what you were bringing up and what needs to change? And you're in an area right now there's a lot of change going on in where you are right now within the DoD. So I understand you probably have to be a little careful as to exactly what you can telegraph as far as where things have been and where things are headed, but whatever you can share as far as what needs to happen in order to improve our success.
So I teetered, thanks, in the beginning of this conversation because I put some of the ongoing solutions into my description. So there are impediments, yes, but we have an administration that's leaning in hard. So bridging the valleys, the fact that the Office of Strategic Capital is so well funded and is moving out on many things, that's a great example of the department doing business. And then I mentioned the modeling and simulation, this new thing, this new entity. Well, a growth, a maturation and expansion of things that were already being done, and now it's codified, and it's a key piece of acquisition reform. So these are huge wins. I can talk to the scale and other issues. So yes, on manufacturing or supply chain really in general, right? It's there's which is security, which is acquisition, which is legacy parts, which is new parts. Being able to make them at scale at the cost point that we need and the delivery rate that we need them. A lot of work going on, focused on those at the moment, including, I'll break it in two parts. One is the acquisition of parts, and the other one is the making it possible to be able to produce those parts. So the department has significant investments in novel manufacturing approaches, breaking the mold, in some cases quite literally, moving to additive manufacturing, right? Or biology-based manufacturing. These are facts. Tremendous successes, a lot of investments moving out. Not a solved problem, but it's a way of, especially if we do it onshore, where we can produce things at speed, at new price points, faster, cheaper, and securely. I have specific information here on microelectronics because we run some large investments there to address in the sense of both supply chain and delivery, but also in terms of bridging those valleys. So the microelectronics commons, for example, we have 8 centers around the country. We have, I think, all of the foundries in the US are involved, all of the design houses, I think on the order of 1,300 different organizations, schools, small businesses, all the defense industrial base are involved. And the idea is you have that great idea, you make something work in your lab, in your small business. How do you get it to scale? How do you get it even reformed into something that you can go to a commercial foundry and make it cheaply and make it in a form factor that's going to deliver for the of our industrial base to build weapon systems and platforms. This is huge, and it's in its third year of work now. 34 major projects running through it, more coming, a lot of successes. And for those tracking, microelectronicscommons.org. The second is trusted and assured microelectronics. We're national security. There are things that we want to do that we can't send to any commercial foundry. There are designs and design implications. There are combinations of exotic materials. It's not just silicon. It's chiplets, it's packaging systems. It's how do these things perform in adverse environments where, in the sense of combat and really terrible situations, this gear still needs to work. How do you make that happen and still be able to produce it securely and at good price points? We focus on that. The one that Gilman began to talk about was, which is number 4 on my list, which was...
Just gonna squeeze it in there.
I am. Aggressive, informed adoption of the latest AI technologies. So everybody, yes, I'm sure there's a question in there somewhere, what about AI? Well, we're all over it. And I used to keep a 3-volume set on my desk at DARPA, which was the AI encyclopedia.
Yeah.
And someone would come in and say, you have to do this. This is AI, this new thing. I say, well, see this set? That's 1980, 1984. And just saying, right? So we have a lot of new tools. My boss, the undersecretary, Emil Michael, is all over this. In the department, the Chief Data and AI Office is now within research and engineering. We're moving out hard on processes, on intelligence processing, as well as getting AI, latest AI and the older stuff, and signal processing and all the other things in the mix into play to make a difference. Having that group within house is just tremendous. They've already cut deals, so we have access to the latest AI technologies available in the department with all the major suppliers. And then from an R&D guy's perspective, yes, that's the bigger picture. We get questions because the Undersecretary is the CTO for the department on any technology, any status. So what's Blue up to? Where are we, state of the art? What do you think adversary X or Y is up to and doing? And if you do that right, the old way, you go out and poll a bunch of people, or different ints, bring it together.
That's the old way.
The old way. We can't do that anymore. So we have a very serious push, because there's tons of stuff that we actually already know that we don't know that we know. And you're always in danger of missing that. But we have the tools, we have the compute tools, we have the processing tools now to be able to change that picture. My boss is pushing for that, and internally we're gearing up and bringing things into alignment to be able to deliver for him.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I've got a bunch of questions here.
That's a lot of questions.
I don't know whether that's good or bad, right? I could take this either way. But there are some that are overlapping, so I'm going to try to just a couple of these together. So first of all, there's multiple questions about risk, right? I think, Scott, you kind of started with the concern about risk, and Gilman, you've talked about risk. We certainly deal with the challenges of how people and organizations are incentivized as far as getting in trouble or having to report why things didn't work out. We also know that the budget process and how we have to interact with that and their timelines also drive a lot of risk. Or challenges related to managing risk. So since you brought it up first, Scott, I'll start with you. What can we do to, and how do you set or balance, I guess, risk tolerance when we're trying to make change and what's acceptable and what's not? And how do you as a large organization or an organization of organizations balance that?
So this is something I've thought about quite a lot over a number of assignments. one of the things that strikes me is the risk. Risk is not a virtue in and of itself, but it's also not harmful in and of itself. So the risk needs to be proportionate to the activity that we're trying to do. We all too often have a singular posture of risk tolerance, and that is we try to get it close to zero. We treat it like it's an NRO satellite, where it has to work almost always. And when you look at the nature of what we're trying to do, particularly with emerging technologies, there's a lot of unknowns. We don't know some of the potential fruits of that technology yet, but yet we're trying to treat from the whole life cycle of the acquisition as if there's zero chance it has to work exactly as advertised. Some of the most exciting benefits from some of that technology are things that we couldn't even have anticipated 5 years ago, because it's morphed into something different and has different attributes. So I think part of it is having, and it gets a little bit, I would like to think, to that market research part, understanding enough about the dynamics of what it is we're buying or interested in buying, how it's inherently risky. There's ways to transfer that risk, to mitigate it in some ways, to avoid it in other ways. I help set up something at the agency of enterprise risk management, which holistically looks at the whole issue of risk, where the taking on of risk in one area might have some unexpected outcomes in other parts of the organization. I would think this gets a little bit what Gilman was saying. We need to be looking beyond one agency or the other. We need to be looking at the whole national security apparatus and how risk reverberates in unexpected, in some ways helpful ways, to other sister organizations. We tend to be still stovepipe, and we only look at how it impacts us. So how one approaches risk, it depends on where you sit and how expansive your view of the world is. If you look at the risk as my little branch in this little office in this little part of the world, you're going to approach risk taking very differently than when you look at it more expansively and how this approaches a much wider organization, because it's totally different conclusions.
Right. Well, and we see the risk calculus so, I've spent a career developing and delivering technology across DoD, IC, in industry, and in government. And the way the acquisition process itself, forget the success of the technology and the application to mission, but we've seen the acquisition process get more and more risk averse itself. Say, for instance, concerns about protests and things like that.
And again, there's a time and place for that, and I don't want to diminish the importance of that, but it's not suitable for other areas. And there needs to be a sliding scale and a built-in expectation that we will assume heightened risk when it warrants it, particularly when the technology itself is evolving in unexpected ways, and usually ways that are beneficial.
Gilman, I think the first time I ever saw you speak, which was in a conference room in an undisclosed location, you brought up the point, and you were fairly early in your IC, interactions and working with the IC, and you said you were fascinated by the amazing personal and human risk that the IC and its individuals would take to save another human, to execute an operation, et cetera. But then how incredibly risk averse we were when it came to, we'll say, programmatics and management, whether it's acquisition, engineering, et cetera. So it's been 20 years. You've seen a lot more things. The world's changed quite a bit. What are your thoughts on what do we do about this risk aversion process, and how do we get that balance right?
I remember that speech. It was in the bubble, literally my first year anniversary at In-Q-Tel. And George Tenet said, and Buzzy Krongard told me to be provocative, which, they can't help themselves. So I walked up and I said, imagine this is the bubble. I said, if a terrorist came, opened up the door and threw a hand grenade into this room right now, everybody would rush to throw themselves on the hand grenade to save everybody else in the room. I get that. But what I don't get is why everybody's willing to risk their lives but not their career, because if George came in the room and asked for a decision, everybody would be running for the doors, right? And so I think we need to look at risk differently, right? It isn't about risk tolerance, because it makes an assumption that you're willing to accept imperfection, right, in order to get some capability in place. Those equations have completely changed today. I'll give you some examples. This iPhone, right? Tim Cook says it's going to ship on this blanking day. regardless, right? So the engineers don't get an extra 6 months and miss the ship date. So how do they produce a phone that's reliable across hundreds of millions sold a year and deliver the capability? So first of all, they design a system, right, that understands risks in and of itself. So the system is self-correcting. Second, scale matters. If I'm building Ukrainian drones, right, in my furniture shop, and I have a swarm of 60, and I need 5 to hit the Russian refinery, right, and it only costs me $3,000 a piece, my spec to deliver the end result, not what's the risk of this one particular entity in this ability to get to the end, but in the operational context, is my risk tolerance multiplied by scale give me the result I want? We're not trained for that. We don't train COTRs to do that equation, right? To multiply, 0.19 of confidence by 3,000 rounds on a particular target. What do I need to be? They're told, here's the spec for that one round, and you need to meet that spec, right? That's changing, but I will tell you, in the consumer electronics world, they have that down to the art. And their systems, I was at Andrew the other day, and I won't tell you which system and what program they were on, but there was a sensor. There was a spec that one of the military guys said that they had to hit the spec. And they had the spec that was done in 2017, and it was pre-selected, and they said you have to integrate this sensor onto your capability. And when people looked at that spec, and they said a $50 Sony sensor outperforms that spec, why aren't we using that $50 sensor to solve that particular problem? Because that sensor is being sold in tens of millions, which gets all the cost advantage and all of the capabilities in that system. Now, it doesn't always work that way. But the other part of the training is the following, and risk tolerance. It isn't risk tolerance, it's the wrong concept. Everything we do has risk. The decision not to do something has equal risk of the decision to do something. And so the equation needs to be, on the procurement side, what's the risk of us not doing it versus doing it? Not just the risk of doing it, because the current systems are all targeted because nobody wants to risk their careers.
Thanks.
So if we can just change that equation where everybody who's in the system, whether you're a warfighter, you're a procurement officer, or you're a supplier, to run that risk equation, which is the risk of not doing it versus the risk of doing it, and the risk tolerance necessary based on scale and speed.
Okay. So, Peter, we're going to wrap up the risk conversation with you. Your perspective is, I would guess, a little bit different because the risk world that you work in is earlier research, right? But quickly, so I want to get one more question and we're about out of time. What's your thought related to getting the balance right from that critical technologies improving out? Because you still have to fight the budget cycle and all the other stuff to justify the investments you're making. How's that risk balance work for you?
DARPA quote, it's okay to fail for the right reasons. So if you get, DARPA doesn't just say, this technology is pretty awesome, we're going to pay a bunch of money and get this thing out the door. There seems to be a pony in this approach to this problem. Let's give it a shot. Maybe if we can compete, get people to come in and try it out. And some are going to work in a given time, some are not, and you may then make a larger investment. So the failure, the okay failure is you got the technology wrong, the technology wasn't ready, it can't be got ready in time. The wrong failure is a management failure. Right? So that's the early research thinking, where you're right, in the department where we live, we're into the budget cycle and the large-scale procurements for things. That's why the emphasis that we have on identifying specific critical technology areas and deeply understanding the state of the art in blue, in red, and commercial, and then inside the budget process, this is required by law, actually, in the 2021 NDAA, for us to insert ourselves into department decision-making of investments around those technologies. So that actually is, again, by law, part of the job of the CTO of the department. So that's where, just because somebody or someone somewhere decided that a particular, I won't name a technology, but I can think of several, this one's going to be awesome, and a bunch of money goes into it, and it doesn't go anywhere. Well, the job of the CTO is to be there at the beginning, and we have a CTO at the moment who's really willing to lean in and actually sharpen the set of critical technology areas that we're focused on with an emphasis on scale.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, speed round, last question. I don't want to, we have young professionals and folks just at the beginning of their career with us today. So I've got a couple questions in here related to looking for some guidance and some thoughts. So from each of you, and Gilman, although because our questions are really specifically about government service, but you've watched a lot of folks in government service, and so you have that optic as well. So what advice do you have for students and young professionals going into government service in national security? And we'll go Scott, Peter, and Gilman just to make this easy.
I do really, one of the things I really enjoy is mentoring not just colleagues that are already in the organization, but would be potential colleagues that are in college. And there's a number of them right now that I've talked to. If I think about all the attributes that differentiate those that actually have really successful careers and those that may be less successful careers, it starts not with some pre-existing domain knowledge of how the intelligence community works or even how the contracting process works in the case of acquisitions. It starts with inquisitiveness. And that is just incredible, this incredible gift that keeps giving if you use it properly. Ask questions when they don't make sense. There's so many people on any given day that I see that just go along with the flow, don't even understand an acronym that's thrown out there, don't understand, and sometimes the person that's asking the question is the only one in the room that's asking the question that needs to be asked by some very senior people that are just perpetuating a mythology that they've heard. And I can tell when there's a term that's used that I know is improper. Sometimes I say it in front of them, sometimes I don't, depends on what mood I'm in. But having that ability to really want to understand how things work, and not, I know this is the lightning round or whatever you called it, but that gets to what I was talking about earlier with market research and company research. It's that inherent desire to want to know how things work. And even if you're asking, the only one raising a hand in a room, you're probably asking a question that needs to be asked.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I've seen that time and time again. Peter.
Starting out, do something. I mean, I've seen people get PhDs and then go straight into policy jobs. And for some that's, I get it, and I don't get it, actually. No, get into a place. I was lucky after grad school, I got into Schlumberger, and they said, we do this, we're in 104 countries, it's dirty. Heavy equipment, explosives, all kinds of interesting stuff. Get your hands and knees dirty. I mean, just build something, do something, get that behind you. And that's in an environment where there's margin to be made, there's a P&L activity going on, and being aware of that is incredibly important. And then, if it's your personality, and I discovered this almost fortuitously by joining DARPA the first time as a program manager, this public service thing, I kind of like it. You get up in the morning, it's not about profit, it's about delivery and making a difference. And the national security behind that, and I've been in this business now for 25 years, And I never expected to be there. And every day I get up and I know why I'm getting up and know what I'm going to do. But way back at Schlumberger, they gave me the room. They gave me wicked hard problems to attack and solve. And we did it. The team did it. And that's sitting in the back there. As a general thing, now, or in government, if it's interesting, it's hard, and it's important, give it a shot.
Gilman.
Okay. Be curious, totally agree. Not curious, you're not going to last very long, and you're not actually contributing. Getting dirty, right? It is, right? Not just how people perceive me, it gets to making a difference. Everybody who I've encountered in national security is here because of the mission. And being a part of that mission is really, really special. It can't be substituted for anything else you'll do in your career. I'll give you a good example. When I was very young, I had an uncle who worked for Lockheed on classified programs. He was working there in the 60s. And I asked him, I still remember this, I was 12 years old, and I went to Mountain View where he lived, Cupertino where he lived, and I said, what's the thing you're most proud about? He had on this wall a nuclear missile coming out of a submarine windows, launches right from sea. And he goes up to the picture, gives me a magnifying glass. He says, look over here. You see that pointing thing on the end? It's called an aerospike. This aerospike allows us to put missiles of immense capabilities and fit it into the sub. I worked on that. It was this most proud thing. And the most important thing to remember, because all these kids want, I want to change the world. Great. Changing the world in national security means getting the little things right. So, curious, get dirty, make a difference.
All right, thank you. I'd really like to thank our panelists for taking the time and spending with us this morning and giving us their insights and the leverage of all their experience. Really appreciate it, and thank you all. Go have lunch.